Please be seated. I was looking down at my notes and I realized I have my Yom Kippur sermon. Just kidding. But this is the kind of year it's been, right? It's the kind of year it's been. It'll take a long time to unpack it. I wanted to, this evening, share with you of all the videos and media that I took in over the last 6 months, maybe the most touching one of all of them was at the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was a fictional video of a father talking to his son who was about to go to bed, and they were far into the future from 2020, 5700 AD. I don't know how many of you have seen this. And he was telling him the story of what happened back in that year, 2020, the year of the virus, the year when everything changed. As he calls it, the year of the great realization. So he had a British accent, but I'll try and do it justice. So he says, "My boy, you are growing weary, sleepy thoughts about your head." And the son cries, "Please, that one's my favorite, I promise, just once more." So his father answers, "Okay, snuggle down, my boy. Though I know you know the story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, of poverty and of plenty. Back before we understood that hindsight is 2020, and you see the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got bigger than we ever could have planned. And we'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick that you could have anything you dreamed of in a day and with a click. And we noticed families had stopped talking. And that's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted and the work balance broke. And the children's eyes grew squarer, and every toddler had a phone. And they filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker until you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below we filled our cars. And we'd drive all day around in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic because our waste was capped, until each day when you went fishing, you pulled them out already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why it's best not to upset the lobbies, more convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way, and the governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden amidst the fear, and all the while the people dusted off their instincts, they remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you, and calling up their mums. I guess that's British for mom. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe. And the beaches bore a new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, and some were singing. Some were baking. I think we can say many were baking. And we'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found a cure and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the world we'd left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new. And every simple act of kindness was now given its due. So the boy asked, "But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?" "Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy," his father answers, "before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true." We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many, but that's a story of how it started and why hindsight is 2020. 2020, 5,780. We're still searching for the cure, the vaccine. The Russians claim to have found it. But God willing, Be'ezrat Hashem, it's not too far away. All the world's labs have united in that task. And yet for us, on this Rosh Hashanah Eve, we have a little bit of distance now, perhaps, to do what our tradition asks of us and look back on our world of beauty and of waste, and our lack of attention to each other, but our devotion to our screens and to our work, and the sad state of our moral fabric, of our spiritual fabric, of our social fabric. In a year, not to forget what has come around and about, and to remember names and people and loss, but also to do what Jews have always done on Rosh Hashanah, which is pray for renewal. And that out of all of this will come renewal. Right? Usually these sacred days, they bring us a singular opportunity that we have to gear up for. But this year we're not trying to renew only on this day. Renewal has been the theme of this whole long period since back then, remember March? We're hoping for renewal, we're praying for renewal. And we see that there is, hopefully, perhaps a fragile opportunity. And I remember very early on hearing a family member from my wife's side say, one thing we are sure is that when this is finally over, we will no longer be the same. And this is what we've been going through for these many months. Drastic change after drastic change and still more. And we've been forced to adapt and pivot, that word that I never used to hear before these last few months. And put in our prayers that this period shepherds in a new one. And what are the days of awe about except for creating the renewal? And what is our days of awe about except for us to think about what is each one of our role within that renewal? And that each one of us does have a part to play in the great cosmic renewing of the universe that happens every now and then, bringing a new wind to our lives for the greater world. And as we state on Rosh Hashanah, we'll say this tomorrow several times, after the shofar is sounded, that will be on Sunday, not tomorrow because it will be Shabbat. But we say, Hayom Harat Olam, today the world was created. Because that shofar blast is announcing renewal. It announces a new world. And our tradition teaches us that a shofar blast was the first sound in the nascent universe, the beginning of time. And that there'll be a shofar blast at the very end of time, in the coming of the Messiah. And certainly through this period, there have been moments where we've been thinking, well, when will he or she come? Seems like it's just around the corner. As the world we know falls on its head and unfurls in every direction. And the shofar is considered the birth canal. That's how it's seen. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov from the Ukraine teaches that as the sound comes out of the shofar, an intention, it first begins when an intention is born within us. And then that intention is filled with spirit, our intention to blow sound into the shofar. And then that sound travels through the shofar and becomes this thunderous sound, a concrete sound that's heard by all, the bridges, earth and heaven, from thought into action, which is what Rosh Hashanah is about. And more than anything, perhaps, Rosh Hashanah comes to teach us that we, each one of us, we are the agents of the renewal. We are the ones who blow the shofar. And it's our task to do that work and no one else's, and we each have our role. For some of us, that role is thinking of the ideas of bringing change to our world. And for others, it's taking those ideas on paper and spreading them. And others, it's fulfilling them in the world. Others, it's inspiring people. Others, it's keeping a check on it. And others are the agents of wiping away the old. But Rosh Hashanah is really about choices. Who do we want to be? What do we want to do? What world do we want to create? What world do we want to create? From the world that exists within our own hearts, to the world of our homes, to the world of our communities, to the world of our nation, to the world of our planet. And the renewal is based on many choices. And that opportunity, we can't ignore this year. And this period that is before us, the 10 days and really the month ahead of us, is a gift to put ourselves in a place of vulnerability and of openness, and to revisit some of those inner conversations that we've had about what do we want to do with ourselves and our lives, and how we want to spend our precious time in this transient world. Rosh Hashanah 2020, 5781. How will we use this period? For one, there is a big choice coming up in November that will go a long way in deciding our nation's future. But there is also an opening to think about in these days. What will my professional life look like? What will my family life look like? What will my internal life look like? In a world of waste where we are glued to our screens and our children's eyes are square. But we can feel that there is a possibility, just a little possibility, maybe perhaps for the first time in our lifetime, of a global change that can touch people from one end of the globe to the other. And what will we do with it? Only each one of us can answer that question. Because this year there is a potential for change and renewal, a real rebirth. And because it is so front and center, everything is geared towards it. There is nothing, we just can't ignore it. We're all aligned around it. And every time we try and ignore it, it comes back to us. And that growth and that change is never easy. So a little Torah over the next few days of Rosh Hashanah. We will soon be reading the stories of Abraham. And we don't read the stories where Abraham gets blessings and everything is hunky-dory. We read the two most difficult episodes of Abraham's life, where he has to cast out his first son, Yishmael, and when God asks him to sacrifice his other son, Isaac. We're not called to read the moments when it was easy. We're called to read about the difficult, heart-wrenching moments in his life, passages that we go through and we contemplate every year at this time, as Abraham is carried to his limit, beyond his limit of what he thought capable. And he had to make choices. Obey his wife, obey God, and how to listen to that calling in his own heart and that calling in his own soul. And how to balance everything he already knew about the world and himself with everything that he was beginning to learn and hope to learn. Where was his solid ground? And where to find your deepest voice within, and how to find the most compassionate eyes that you can, and the most steadfast spirit, and the most tender look to peer at one's own self, the strongest values, the most elevated thought and ideal, the greatest urge to serve others above our own needs, and to place our feet on the path that we know we want to take, but that is so difficult to take because we've never taken it before, but knowing that that is a path we must take nonetheless, because it's the path of newness, of change, of renewal, of breaking the fabric of one world to create a new one. And so we believe that Abraham Avinu, our father, single-handedly carried the entire world into a new period, new chapter, monotheism, the end of child sacrifice, the birth of a personal relationship with the divine, fighting against injustice. Talk about realizations. And now here we are, with our hearts a little too open at times, through mourning, pain and difficulty, with all of the ups and downs and arounds, taking away our sense of normality. And that we do finally see with clarity the choices, our choices, that will determine what happens out of a period like this. And this is what it means, that it's a period of renewal, the Yamim Noraim, the most sacred month of the Jewish calendar. And from the beginning of Elul, a month ago, we start blowing the shofar and we do cheshbon hanefesh, the accounting of the soul. And we have the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance beginning this evening. When that thought of change is engraved within our soul, and at the end, as the gates close, that renewal is sealed. But the gates remain a crack open until Sukkot. A whole period when we look and we think about those choices that we all make in life. Where do we want to go? What choices do we want to make? Where do you want to ask for forgiveness? Where do you want to give for forgiveness? And take an honest look. And so we have one day of a week that our tradition gives us, Shabbat, to think about all this. If we can find that time. Then there are the holidays, which is even more powerfully. And Yom Kippur is known as the Shabbat of all Shabbat, the Sabbath of all Sabbaths, Shabbat Shabbaton. And then in biblical times, they even had the Jubilee year. Every 49 years, once a generation, everyone would return, would stop whatever they were doing, return to their lands, and really take a year to think about what it was all about. And the fact that we can choose means that we're masters of our own destiny. We decide what our future looks like. And that is a core idea at the center of what it means to be Jewish, that we are masters of our destiny. And it's not really some philosophic, airy-fairy idea. It's actually a very pragmatic idea when you think about it. You can actually bring about change in your life. If you think about it, you reflect on it, then you set your intention, and then you make it happen. And when you are in ill health, and you get a health warning that something is not going well, you know you have to make a change to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Because you know that the next one could be worse, could be the end. So you have to make changes, lifestyles, habits. And Rosh Hashanah is the health warning on every level, soul, physical, mental. And COVID is a health warning, quite literally about the health of humanity, and of our cooperation between people, of the health of the planet. And the health warning is not just do it or else. It's not just a dire prognosis, not only worry. It's also realistic. You just do this, and you change your direction. It's very concrete. A warning to remind us that we are masters of our own destiny, and we decide our fate. We decide. And nothing is inevitable. Life isn't just some carpet you stand on, you get on, and then it takes you. Because we can make right choices, and people every day decide on a very basic level. What choice are you going to make? In the case of the pandemic, social distancing or not, wear a mask or not, and that is a choice. In Israel, people decided they were not going to, and it bore a price. There was a second wave, fatalities increased by 100%. They now have the highest rate of infection in the world and are under another almost complete lockdown for Rosh Hashanah. And yet, we also have to acknowledge that it's not all completely in our hands, because we can make all the right choices, and we can do everything right, and it may still not happen as we wish. And that is why prayer is such an important part of this period. It is why we spend hours in synagogue over so many days to ask for clarity in our hearts, to ask the universe and the divine for help in our deepest self in this difficult and truly overwhelming task. We live in a beautiful world. We really live in a beautiful world. That's something we've all also come to realize and see. We want to make our time here in this life as positive and as intentional as we can, and that is a choice. And bring that world one step closer to the world that God envisioned in the words of our prophets 3,000 years ago. And to forge a path. Maybe it's a path we haven't forged before, because it hasn't been created yet. And although that kind of mountain looks very high, in a way can look obscured, and we do not believe that our minds and our hearts and our hands and our feet and our being is mighty enough to scale it and to forge this path, still we do walk on, still we do move ahead, because we also find new love, new compassion, new energy, new joy, new determination, and new strength. It is up to us in the grace of God. Shabbat Shalom. Good Yom Tov.